Hello, everybody. So I'm very open that I'm very much drawn to mysticism and esotericism, specifically Christian esotericism. And because of that, you might understand that I find it quite difficult to fit into the modern church. I mean, I still go every now and again. There's an Anglican church around the corner from me, and it's not too bad on the whole. But God, some of the music they play, it's awful, and it's not even one of the bad ones. It's this go Jesus go, come on everybody, let's get down for Christmas. What the hell is this? I'm not singing that. Anyway, I don't mind if it's for the kids, but when the adults are singing it, it's obviously not for me. Especially in the Anglican church where they have this wonderful tradition of hymns and evensong, singing this nonsense. Anyway, they're not going to listen to an old bigot like me. So, I mind my own business. I just listen to the preacher, say hello to a few people and go. Normally I'll go to like an Orthodox church or something after that to, sort of get a bit deeper into it. But anyway, the point I'm making is all of this is really quite symbolic and typical of the modern era. And this is very consistent with traditionalist thought as well. It says something like we're living in an era called the Kali Yuga. They took that phrase from Hinduism and Hindu spiritual thought, i.e. we're living in an age of materialism, spiritual truth is fragmented, spiritual orders are broken. It's very, very difficult to find that exoteric, which is the outer expression of true spiritual reality. Now that's been really consistent with my experience as well. However, I think this can be overplayed somewhat in the modern era, and I don't want to make out that all church is bad or all exoteric form is bad. And I think that's a bit of a mistake, which I've witnessed in my own spiritual life. And I can see it just getting a bit worse. And it's kind of understandable because, again, more and more people go to church and they find, oh, God, I'm just getting another lecture from a lesbian here, or it's just very literal, and they feel like I'm just not getting that depth. In fact, some people kindly reach out to me and say, I really like what you say, but I don't find that depth when I go to the church. And it's not to make out, a wise one that I am. It's just I'm someone who's deeply, invested in his spiritual life over, well over 10 years. So I'm very experienced in it, and I can sort of see the beauty of the church sometimes. You have to know where you're looking and pierce through, because the modern church almost wants to push you away or basically just make you a soppy-doppy liberal, which doesn't really inspire men, which is why they go to the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, understandably. Or even, actually, to be fair, a lot of them go to the East now as well. Big New Age movement. I think that might have hit an apex, perhaps in the past couple of years. But it was huge, 5-10 years ago, and I was very much swept up in that. Did a lot of Advaita Vedanta. That's the sort of non-dual school of Hindu thought. Buddhism I was very into as well. But in many senses, this New Ageism, these Eckhart Tolles and people like that, they're absolutely huge. And I really do like Eckhart Tolle. I think he's great. But there is a bit of a reverse problem you have with the New Age thing, in that they're completely without exoteric form. It's all just the teacher. And in a sense, they're great because they offer a simple introduction to spirituality, non-duality and so on. But again, you can see the problem, or at least I believe I can see a problem with the way it's developed, in that it's lots of esotericism, but without order, without structure. And that's very anti-traditionalist, because the traditionalists would state that, look, you can acquire these great spiritual insights, but you have to almost go through a process of initiation, of hierarchy, of going up each level, of purifying yourself. It's what the great religions do, properly understood. That's why you have fasting and periods of contemplation, and you work with a higher up in the given institution and so on to guide you through. Well, that's kind of all gone. And in one sense, you can say, well, the exoteric traditions in the West have been destroyed, so what do you expect them to do? But the problem is, it's just playing into, if you like, the Western liberal system. In the one sense, in the sort of non-duality New Age world, I saw a lot of sort of people who've, drug problems, or women who've hit the wall. They're sort of 40 now, and they're kind of getting into spirituality now. It's kind of like basically an escape, really. And look, all right, it's something positive they're doing, that's nice, but you can kind of see what's going on. It's more Western liberal individualism in the guise of spirituality. And then, of course, what's the actual structure? Well, it's money, really. People making money. Although, to be fair, some of them are not quite that good. Some of them it's sex, and that is unfortunately a problem in that New Age world. It's quite bad, actually. Not all, but certainly quite a fair few. And the big one for me, given my interests, if you watch the main channel, is it offers no civilizational structure. Again, it's typical of modern Western liberalism. It's go off into your own little private space and just explore this for yourself. And again, that's better than nothing. I'm glad people are finding ways to get beyond, if you like, the torture of the individual small self. But when it comes to the broader civilizational structure, it's really offering nothing at all, really. Anyway, the reason I'm saying all of this is because there is a balance, I would say, in the spiritual life between the exoteric, that's the outer, and the esoteric, that's the inner understanding. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but you could say in the ultimate understanding, everything is the esoteric, really. But again, that's a bit like dropping a load of LSD and thinking you're enlightened. I just leave that well alone, really, and just stick with the spiritual practice until the truth is revealed to you. But the point I'm making here is, it's become a real problem because the esoteric stands completely away from the exo now in the New Age thing. And the exo really doesn't like the esoteric. If I go to a church, for instance, a Catholic church, they'll be like, heathen, sinner, walketh among us. A bit more accepted in the Orthodox Church. They have a bit more of a mystic tradition to the kind of get you. The Anglican Church just won't know what you're talking about. They'll be like, do you want a copy of The Guardian? That's about all they can really say. And anyway, there are, I'm painting with broad brushstrokes here, but just broadly speaking, we have this issue between the exo and the esoteric. But I would really like to emphasize in this video that because of these issues, it doesn't mean that we just choose one and neglect the other. I think you could say in simple terms, practical terms, the exoteric speaks to the human dimension of us, and the esoteric speaks to the being aspect of us, which again is the real element of us, but let's not get too bogged down in that for now. And I have a very interesting quote here from a lesser known traditionalist called Fritjof Schuon, and he's speaking about this issue here. So I'll just quote him. He's speaking about how the exoteric can be actually used to our benefit on the spiritual path. Quote, "The exoteric can be used in two ways. On the one hand, by intellectual transposition into the esoteric order, in which case they will act as supports of intellectual actualization, and on the other hand, by their regulating action on the individual portion of the being." So, of course, what he's saying there is, number one, what the exoteric tradition really offers us is a bit of intellectual understanding, a bit of intellectual guidance. Now, if you know anything about the true spiritual path, you'll know that the intellect can only go so far. And this leads some people, even within church history, to really go against the mind. The mind is dark, it's the intellect, it can't really see light. Now, I would say it's right about that, but it doesn't mean it's useless. It can help to understand this path on the intellectual level to a certain degree. So in one sense, we could say that's what the exoteric, as we might call it in the West, the Christian life, the narrow way is for. It's to try and show us, the basis of what this life means. And the second point that he makes, of course, is that it's a regulating action. This is really wonderful language, regulating. What does that mean? Well, again, because if we think about the New Age thing, everybody goes along to the Eckhart Tolle thing or whoever else the big names are now. There's plenty of them. And it's all this idea of, I'll get enlightened over a weekend, this sort of stuff. And again, it's this typical Western thing. I want it now. I want to be the best now. And it's completely the wrong way around. You need to let go of all of that. You need to diminish till you're almost nothing. But again, topic for another video. But the point is that the regulating action prepares us for the deeper truths to take root within us. And these can take many forms in our life, these regulating actions within the institution. Of course, the different religious paths, the different spiritual paths within the religion. And then, there's all sorts of personal disciplines we might have in our own life. And the idea is that the exoteric order, which will say things, in the Christian tradition, no lusting, or at least when you are lusting, being aware of the lusting that's going on, bringing consciousness and love to that, Same with the drink. Obviously in Islam, no drink at all. It tends to be like that in the Buddhist world as well, though not a strict rule. And in the Christian world, because we all drink alcohol in the Christian world, we think, it's basically allowed. Not really when you properly understand the path. You can drink, but you're supposed to drink in moderation, and not many of us really do that. So the point is that it's about adhering to these rules, these guides, in order to sort of flatten out that horizontal part of ourselves, the human side of ourselves. Because if that's all over the place, just jumping from thing to thing, from lust to temptation, you're just being pulled from pillar to post, and you're not going to be able to be still enough for the teaching, the vertical dimension, the esoteric dimension, to really take root. So, of course, the point I'm making here is you can really see, hopefully, the value of the exoteric path. And that's why, even in this time where the church is deeply imperfect, you can hopefully understand that we do need both of these. So even in your own small way, even if it's not perfect, having that exoteric tradition is a really nice guide. And then that aids us in, if you like, working through the layers, or really peeling back the layers within until the great realization happens. But that's not easy. That takes time for many of us, and it can be scary. And sometimes we have to run back and just get away from it all, because it can be very confronting, because everything almost has to be ripped down, and that's a very destabilizing experience when you're on the real path. But again, this is why I believe you need the hierarchy, you need guides, you need fellows, people that you can connect with on this stuff. Because if you're on your own, it's really, really difficult to really make progress, and people tend to run back into the world then. And sometimes it's very simple. You just need the exoteric tradition, just to simplify things and just follow that for a while, and let, if you like, the esoteric wisdom give birth within you, and give it time just to settle, In fact, examples of this in my own life is sometimes I will have quite major periods of realization. And then with that, I just know, like, via experience, I need some time out for a bit. I don't mean ignoring my spiritual life, but I just mean just doing the basics, because you can really rock yourself, when you are taking on revolutionary understanding, which it flips everything you think even the idea of material goes. The idea of the world being out there goes. You realize all is one. And that's very frightening. In fact, I had a friend who dropped a load of acid at 18 and thought he was God, and spent 6 months in a mental institute. And you can see what's happening with the drugs. He just wasn't ready for the drugs. And, probably already know, I'm not really pro, that sort of thing. You do you, whatever you want. But me personally, I prefer just the sober spiritual path. But anyway, this fella, I remember he was telling me this story, and he was all like, and that's why, I have to keep it very simple now. Maybe he should. But you can see the wisdom was trying to show him that God is within. But his mind was so frightened and so confused by the lesson, it turned into the ego thinking, I am God. And then that's madness. We've all seen those, loopy-loos running around town centres and stuff. It's because the teaching, they're not ready for the teaching. They haven't been prepared. And again, this is why we have what's called the periods of containment on the spiritual journey. It's why you often need the exoteric path, as it feeds into the esoteric, the containment to hold you still with people you can trust. You can let yourself go and almost fall into the love of God. If you don't have that, you'll start to feel a bit mad. This is where the lovely phrase from Joseph Campbell comes from. The psychotic drowns in the same waters the mystic swims. Now, you need time to learn to let go. Well, most of us do. So some people are just naturals, but they're very, very rare. Most of us, it's a process of learning and growing. So again, what I'm saying here, and the purpose of this video, is that interaction of the exoteric, which we can understand is needed just on a purely civilizational level, for the normies who aren't interested in this sort of stuff, the kids, even for the culture, you need that understanding. But for those of us who are really drawn to the spiritual path, you're going to go beyond it, but it doesn't mean you don't need it. It's an incubator, it's a guide, if you will. And normally, when we go into the real spiritual path, we'll realize we're midwits of the spirit, and that's part of the growth. Everything that we think we are, as I say, has to almost come apart. So the essence is here that the exoteric gives birth to the esoteric via that process of containment. And this isn't for everybody, by the way. This is for the people that are really drawn to this stuff. As I say on the main channel, these people are vital in my eyes, but it's not for everyone. It's not for 100% of the population. It's for a minority who are deeply drawn to these things, who feel that pull within them and that light coming on inside. And then if you like, they act as the, quote, symbolic priestly class. Again, don't mean literally, although ideally it should be literal. But again, we're in the Kali Yuga. You're not really going to get that right now. But the point is we can find people who are awake to these truths and do aid each other on the way. And then, of course, they pass down these transcendent truths into the exoteric forms of the society, and the mythological structures that we follow. That's how it should ideally work. Now, if you are drawn to this stuff, I've got some big plans in the new year, very big plans for the Substack. I'm going to announce them on Saturday, actually. So if you are a subscriber, do come along. I'd love to get your opinion, because I really want to try and create this exoteric to esoteric bridge in my work. It's all well and good talking about this stuff, complaining about the state of the world. There needs to be something that actually I'm offering you and can really take you on this journey. And you have support from me, support from other people on the same path, and also be really reconnecting with some of these deeper teachings, the deeper essence. And as you'll probably know if you follow my work closely, I think this is absolutely essential for the future of the West. All the traditionalists basically said this. The West is falling apart because it's lost the esoteric spark, and all you're left with is basically the dead exoteric then. It's lost its vitality. But it's not to say that this sort of thing can't be realised as things start to collapse around us. And there is already a massive turn back that we're seeing to the church. But again, as I've always said, what are people going to find when they get there? Probably not what they're looking for. But that means it's on us, that is the next generation, to start reawakening these truths, aiding each other on that path. So do join the Substack in preparation for that. Would love to have you along for this next year. Big plans, as I say. Do consider subscribing to this channel if you're new as well. Coaching is available. Just reach out. Peace, friends.